Welcome to This Explainer. We are diving right into an incredibly complex socioeconomic powder keg, Russia in 1920 and 1921. You see, the brutal civil war was supposedly ending, but instead, the country was teetering right on the brink of yet another massive revolution. So let's unpack exactly how and why that happened.
Our analysis today comes straight from the meticulous research of historian Paul Avrich, specifically his pivotal text, Kronstadt 1921. It gives us a deeply grounded, objective look at this massive collision between the ideals of a revolution and the really harsh realities of preserving state power. We've got a lot of ground to cover. We'll trace the false dawn of peace, the agrarian crisis, the total collapse of the cities, the Petrograd strikes, and finally, the Bolshevik crackdown. Basically, we're looking at how a rural disaster and an urban collapse collided to spark those strikes.
Let's kick things off with the so-called false dawn of peace.
So, by the autumn of 1920, the Civil War was effectively won. But domestically, the nation was physically devastated and completely bankrupt. To really grasp why, we have to look at war communism, or Pradrasverska. This was an extreme emergency policy. We're talking total state centralization and the forcible requisitioning of grain. Imagine armed detachments sent out into the countryside to literally take food at pistol point. Now, this absolutely saved the Bolsheviks militarily, but it completely alienated the rural masses, leaving them without essentials or even seeds for the very next harvest.
Which brings us right into the peasant-agrarian crisis.
During the Civil War, peasants kind of tolerated war communism as the lesser of two evils compared to the white landlords returning. But the second that threat vanished in 1920, their patience completely evaporated. Just look at this number, 50,000. That staggeringly large number is the strength of just one single rebel army in the Tambov province, led by A.S. Antonov. Millions of restless, demobilized Red Army veterans were returning to starving villages, and they channeled their military experience into fierce guerrilla warfare against those government requisition squads.
So how exactly did the government respond to this rural explosion? Well, instead of concessions, state planners doubled down. At the 8th Congress of Soviets, Valeriy Nasinsky actually proposed the compulsory mass organization of production through sewing committees. Basically, instead of reviving free trade, the state wanted to create rigid bureaucracies to dictate exactly how the peasant should farm.
And the friction on the ground was immediate. One Siberian peasant delegate fired back instantly with a brilliant response, "Asinsky does not know Siberia. I have been plowing there for 38 years, but Asinsky knows nothing." That perfectly captures the absolute refusal of the rural population to just be cultivated under the lash. They demanded the freedom to trade, not more regimentation.
Meanwhile, let's shift gears and look at the collapse of the cities.
Because this urban collapse was happening on a terrifying parallel track to the rural disaster. By the end of 1920, total industrial output had shrunk to a mere 20% of its 1913 levels, and cast iron, that plummeted to under 3%. Between a totally destroyed railway system and an Allied blockade, factories were literally freezing over and shutting down.
And the human toll here was just catastrophic. Petrograd lost nearly 2/3 of its population. People were fleeing unheated apartments and starvation rations, which were just a few hundred grams of black bread a day, and abandoning the cities entirely. They ended up joining these swarms of bagmen, tramping back to the villages just to barter stolen factory materials for any food they could find.
As you can imagine, this level of desperation sparked a fierce ideological debate that fractured the country's leadership. You had Leon Trotsky proposing the militarization of labor to basically put workers under strict military discipline, while state planners pushed for those agricultural sewing committees. On the flip side, the workers' opposition fought for trade union autonomy, and groups like the Mensheviks and SRs demanded free trade and civil liberties. So the government is just completely paralyzed by infighting right as the crisis hits its absolute peak.
All of this tension finally boils over with the Petrograd factory strikes.
The rural and urban tracks collided head-on in early 1921. Hindered by heavy snows, the trains carrying food simply stopped arriving. Then, on January 22nd, the government announced a sudden one-third cut to those already meager bread rations. The breaking point hit on February 24th when the Trubichny factory workers just walked out. Military cadets were sent in, but the momentum was totally unstoppable. By February 28th, a massive strike hit the legendary Pudilov Metal Works, pulling in 6,000 workers. What started as desperate, spontaneous pleas for just shoes and food morphed rapidly into explosive political demands.
Leaflets started appearing on the walls of Petrograd, declaring, "Down with the communists! Long live the Popular Constituent Assembly!" Championed by Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries, these strikes were now demanding an end to the one-party dictatorship and a return to the democratic promises of 1917.
Which leads us to the final piece of the puzzle, the Bolshevik crackdown.
Faced with a labor crisis that eerily mirrored the revolution of 1917, the Petrograd authorities under Grigory Zinoviev moved extremely decisively. They used a highly calculated mix of force and concession. First, they formed a three-man defense committee with sweeping emergency powers, declared strict martial law, and rolled out an 11 p.m. curfew. To break the workers' resolve, they literally locked strikers out of the factories, completely denying them their food rations. Concurrently, the Cheka arrested roughly 500 workers and 5,000 Mensheviks. But their real masterstroke, distributing emergency extra rations of meat and bread to the remaining soldiers and workers to fracture the strike's solidarity.
All of this leaves us with a really haunting question to take away from this explainer. If securing a revolution requires destroying the very liberties and popular initiative it promised in the first place, was the victory actually won or merely replaced by a new autocracy? As the Bolsheviks ruthlessly crush these strikes to preserve their state, which, by the way, directly sets the stage for the tragic Kronstadt rebellion that follows, did they destroy the very soul of the revolution they had fought so hard to win? It is a deeply complex, sobering piece of history. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the history behind the facts.